30 years ago, WWE introduced a brand new concept, and that was called In Your House. On that night, they gave away a house to a family. That house was somewhere in Florida. But also, the coolest thing about that show was it was the first fallout of WrestleMania 11, where we saw Diesel defend the WWE Championship against Shawn Michaels. Well, he won. Y'all may know the story, but Shawn Michaels showed him out. The next night, Shawn Michaels turned babyface because his bodyguard, Psycho Sid, turned on him. And this was his revenge. But like I said, WWE introduced a new concept. A concept, when you think of the new generation era, you think of WWE In Your House. Now, I know it took place during the Attitude Era from 1995 to 1999 to be exact. But I was sitting back and I watched the show in its entirety. So today, I'm going to go back over that show and I'll point out a few things that I noticed and some matches I don't think would work in today's show. Coming up on this week's episode of Break It Down with Brian H.
No, baby, that's for somebody else. We're just going to keep you right where you're at right now.
It doesn't matter what you think.
The Wrestling Realm presents Break It Down with Brian H.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Break It Down with Brian H. I'm your host, Brian H. Waters. This show, of course, is brought to you by the Wrestling Realm. Now, folks, remember, if you are looking to save money on your favorite artist concert, or you're looking to save some money on the NBA playoffs, we got the Knicks taking on the Indiana Pacers on the Eastern Conference for the title. And for the Western Conference title, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you want to go to one of those games, and we know it's going to cost you a lot of money, and one thing I know, it's going to cost you more than $50, but I can save you $20, any purchase $50 or more, on tickets by using the code Wrestling Realm on SeatGeek. So make sure y'all check that out. It also is valid for wrestling, sports, and anything else. Folks, I talked about WWE In Your House at the top. That's what we're going to talk about today. Like I said, when I see this, because I had to bring out the DVD, Best of In Your House. When I see that logo, I think back to the days of Bret the Hitman Hart, of Shawn Michaels, of Big Daddy Cool Diesel, Razor Ramon, the British Bulldog. These are the names I think about. You know, sure, like on here you also have like Stone Cold Steve Austin, you have Mankind, Undertaker. Yeah, they were there too. But like I said, this is the show that I think about. I think about the new generation era, the Attitude Era. Absolutely. But by that time, the show had started getting their own names and it kind of got away from the In Your House branding. But right here, and then of course, the video game. Now, I know some people like it, some people don't. Very, very archaic style video game. As I pull out the booklet because I still got a sticker. But I had this. It was a PlayStation exclusive, I believe. It was a PlayStation 1, that is. This was the game before. This is the last game before they went to more of the simulation style. But on the game you had Bret Hart, Ahmed Johnson, Vader, Goldust, Ultimate Warrior, Owen Hart, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, British Bulldog, Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels. I actually may stream this later. Let me know what y'all think if y'all want me to stream that. But folks, today we're going to talk about the show, the inaugural In Your House. It took place in May of 1995. What a time. Like I said, 30 years ago. And I'm going to say off the top, this was a night where Bret Hart proved that he was the best in the world at this time. Yeah, Diesel was the champion. He was the face of the company, face of the franchise. But we all know Bret was the heart and soul on that night. So, one of the notes, I'm going to had my sheet out because I took notes while I did this. But going in, the first thing I noticed, you had Vince McMahon, you had Doc Hendricks on commentary. Doc Hendricks, I may say, who is that? That was Michael P.S. Hayes. Came to WWE. You may have heard the story. They wanted him to cut his hair. He had the long Goldilocks. They said, nope. Vince wanted him to cut his hair, so he cut his hair. He was a team player. And I always thought he did a good job. When you think about the best commentators, you are not going to put Doc Hendricks and Vince McMahon in the conversation. But considering they were good at what they did. They told a great story. Doc was able to give that insight, him being a former wrestler, a legend down in the South, the Texas territories, the Georgia territories, the Mid-South territories. But I thought that, it was a solid night. This won't be a show that you'll see people always rant and rave about. Probably won't even make your top 5 in your house shows, I'm sure. This was simply, I like to call it the very first Backlash, right? When you think about Backlash, you think about the fallout to WrestleMania. This was the first Backlash, and this would kick off the time where WWE will give us those monthly pay-per-views. And for those who may not remember, before 95, you had Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, before 93, Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series. Then here comes the King of the Ring in 93. And you had the Classic 5 in 98. I remember WWE, they actually sold the box set. I wanted that. I never bought it. I wanted it so bad, but I do have them all now, thankfully. But now you have, after this show, you are getting a Your House pay-per-view every single month. And another thing to note about this one, it was 2 hours. Show was 2 hours where you was able to, it was kind of, I remember these being about $20. My mother didn't order these. It's like, I'm not ordering that. I got WrestleMania, I got SummerSlam. Every now and then I get a Survivor Series or a Royal Rumble, but I definitely got WrestleMania and SummerSlam. But shout out to my Uncle Troy, came through with the clutch with the tapes. So this was fun. This it was very nostalgic. It had a nostalgic feeling. It's so easy for people to talk about how boring Kevin Nash's run, Diesel's run as WWE champion, or how he wasn't the guy. I think that's a lazy narrative. As a wrestling fan, as somebody who loved the 90s and somebody who loves nostalgia, I have that much love for the new generation era as I do for the Attitude Era. These are the moments that shaped me, shaped my childhood. And this pay-per-view was a prime example of that. Like I said, the fallout for WrestleMania. And I watched this without doing the type of research that goes into like listening to the podcast, listen to the experts. I'll listen to that afterwards. I wanted to give my authentic take on the show after watching this. So here we go. So we open up with the modern day Hakushi taking on Bret the Hitman Hart. Off the top, they let you know Bret Hart was amongst the Triple Crown winners of the WWE championships, right? So at this time, there's the WWE title, the Intercontinental title, and the tag team titles. He joined Pedro Morales and Macho Man Randy Savage. And I think that was it at the time. Yeah, he was one of few. It was a lot of Triple Crown winners, but Bret was one of few. So that was interesting. I thought they had a great match. Hakushi came in undefeated, but Bret Hart got the job done. But he would not be done for the night. Remember, I said face of the company, face of the franchise, as he would be taking on Jerry the King Lawler later on. More on that later. But, I'm going to go through the card, and I'm not going to obviously analyze every match. But there you had Razor Ramon versus Double J and the Roadie. Double J, Jeff Jarrett, Roadie was Road Dogg. And it's so interesting looking at the Roadie here because he looks like a young boy. He looks like a Roadie. Who would have ever thought at this time he would become one of the top 5 greatest promos in professional wrestling? Not when you seeing that, So in a time of gimmicks, he played that gimmick very well. I thought. But Razor Ramon was victorious. 1, 2, 3 Kid was out due to neck injury at this time. And that was the thing. And I remember I can take you back to being upset because I wanted Razor to have that Intercontinental Championship back. Jeff Jarrett took it from him at the Royal Rumble. He wasn't able to get it back at WrestleMania. I wanted him to have it back. Unfortunately, this was not an Intercontinental title match. I did not like it. Now, y'all know he would eventually, Shawn Michaels would beat Jeff Jarrett. And eventually the title found its way back to Razor Ramon. Then we had some King of the Ring qualifier match. First of all, before we get there, they had a commercial, y'all. They had a commercial. It was the Bret Hart shirt. It was dope. And guess how much? It was only $20. Man, I miss them $20 days. I wasn't buying wrestling shirts, didn't have credit card. Obviously, I wasn't one of those kids ask your parents for permission because I'm like, my mother gonna say no, so I'm not even gonna ask. But I'm gonna ask her. I'm like, Mom, would you have bought me a $20 t-shirt back then? I don't know what the answer is gonna be, but I would love for a wrestling shirt to be $20, brand new, ordering it from the television. So, King of the Ring qualifying match, we had Adam Bomb taking on the eventual King of the Ring winner, that being Mabel. Y'all may remember. This was a solid match. Then we had Yokozuna and Owen Hart taking on the Smoking Guns, Bart and Billy Gunn. Now, a few things I noticed about this match. One, you hear about the stories of the time Yoko wasn't as mobile. This is the downward spiral, and you can see it the way he's moving, unfortunately. They're billing him at 600 pounds. 600 pounds around this time. So that was one thing. And then, Owen Hart is getting over clearly as a heel. I remember as he's walking out to the ring, Doc Hendricks is saying, it's very rare. This is the first time Owen is walking into an arena, into a show as the champion, and Bret Hart isn't. So, but they would get the job done. Of course, they would hold on to the tag titles. I would have to do my research to remember who they lost it to, but Owen Hart and Yokozuna victorious. Then we had a backstage promo by Diesel. Very heartfelt. First time he was his first Mother's Day without his mom. But the thing I noticed about Big Daddy Cool was with his promo styles, he could talk and then he could turn it up when it meant time, and he would sell you on the match. And that's what he was doing ahead of his match with Psycho Sid. And he was like, how much time we got left? About 40 minutes left. And it just felt like, okay, we pace it, we getting ready, boom, And it was little stuff like that. I used to love what they do. It was like, how much longer until our match? How much longer? Little stuff like that. The interviews backstage before the matches, not right away, but like 3 or 4 matches ahead of time. It just gave a whole different feel to the show. And then we had Jerry Lawler taking on Bret Hart. Now, what's interesting is they hired this lady, and I'm going to put it right here on your screen. This lady was Jerry Lawler's mother. And I'm like, that's so weird because, first of all, she looks young. She looks good. She looks like she's probably younger than Jerry Lawler. And he was like, oh, Mom, give me a kiss. Give me good luck. And after you win, I'm going to beat up Helen Hart. So, this is the time when Jerry's making all the jokes about the Hart family. And if you read Bret's book, you learn like Bret didn't really care for it too much, but his parents loved it. They understood the business. So, but Jerry Lawler would defeat Bret Hart after Hakushi would make his way out to the ring. And this was the feud of the summer. The summer of 95 was all about Bret versus Jerry. It's a shame that wasn't a world title feud. I know they was trying to get Diesel going and then Shawn going, but it's very interesting it wasn't. I think I actually want to go back and watch Diesel versus Mabel. More on that later. But we had, like I said, he was victorious. Bret would, beat him up afterwards. Of course, he wasn't going to leave the arena on his back. Y'all may remember King of the Ring 95. There was the infamous Kiss My Foot match. And then after the Kiss My Foot match, we was introduced to a dentist because they had to clean his mouth. That dentist would become Isaac Yankem. who y'all know would later become the Big Red Machine, Kane. So there was that match. And then we get to the main event. They do the whole thing. They give the fan a house. They make the phone call. It's always wondered, like, it's so much fun when you watch wrestling as a child because you don't know if this is predetermined. So you just watch everything as a shoot. You like, well, would they call our house? Did we sign up? And it's like, how did they know whose house to call? But somebody won a house that day. And I believe they said like now it's no longer there or something. But if anybody knows about that house, y'all let me know. And then in the main event, we had Diesel versus Sid. The story with Sid was after leaving Shawn Michaels, he would join $1 Million Man's Corporation, a name that would be recycled, by the way. But the corporation, DiBiase, was trying to get to that championship. This match was not bad. Now, do I think it will work in 2025? No. People want to see certain moves. They want to see all that, or big meaty men smacking meat, or it had to be one or the other. But you did have two athletic big men, and I enjoyed it for what it was. I enjoyed Diesel versus Sid. I want to know how do people feel about it. Shout out to the late great Sid. But to me, as a child, I remember rooting for Diesel to beat up Sid because Sid had turned his back on Shawn Michaels. Now, I was one who liked Shawn Michaels the moment Sid dropped that powerbomb on him. I was like, oh man, why would he do that? And that was the thing. So I wasn't a Shawn Michaels fan before that, but now I am. And this was the Avengers. And after Diesel was getting beat up by the corporation, you had Tatanka come out there, and that would set us up for the King of the Ring, where the tag match at 95 was Diesel and Bam Bam Bigelow, who came out to rescue. He came out to rescue Diesel because if y'all remember, Bam Bam Bigelow was kicked out of the corporation after he lost in the main event of WrestleMania 11 when he lost to Lawrence Taylor. DiBiase kicked him out of the corporation. So here, Diesel and Bam Bam, he's coming out to the aid, and that's the way we end the show. Overall, it's a good rewatch. 30 years ago, it's great nostalgia. Great nostalgia. Y'all let me know what y'all think. Like I said, In Your House, the very first one, I wanted to do something because it's a 30-year anniversary. Also, 8 at the time, so you do your math. You know how old I am now. But that is it for this week's episode of Break It Down with Brian H. Episode 297. Thank you, everybody who's been on this journey. And if you've watched all 297 episodes, thank you so much. Let me know if you have. But I love all of you. And I want to, just send lots and lots of love as we get ready to go into the summertime. Send lots and lots of love. But until the next time, folks, so long, everybody.